The Montana sky stretched endlessly above, a vast canvas painted in shades of amber and gold as the sun began its descent behind the jagged peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains. In the small town of Clearwater Creek, where the whispers of autumn rustled through cottonwood trees, life moved at the unhurried pace of the nearby river. It was on such an evening in September 1978 that a battered blue pickup truck rumbled to a stop outside Hank Davidson's modest ranch, carrying two unexpected visitors who would change the course of his solitary existence forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hank wiped the sweat from his weathered brow, the day's labor etched in the dirt on his calloused hands and the exhaustion in his shoulders. At 45, his face carried the map of a difficult life. Crow's feet around eyes that had seen too much loss, and a permanent furrow between brows that rarely relaxed. The Double Pine Ranch wasn't much compared to the sprawling cattle operations that dominated the valley, but it was his, all that remained since Margaret's cancer took her 5 years ago, leaving nothing but memories and a silence that seemed to grow louder with each passing season. He was securing the gate to the horse paddock when he noticed the cloud of dust approaching down his long driveway. Visitors were rare out this way, 10 miles from town and not on the way to anywhere worth going. Hank straightened, squinting against the setting sun as the truck came into view, its blue paint peeling and one headlight missing. It wasn't a vehicle he recognized from the area. The truck rolled to a stop, the engine coughing twice before falling silent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door creaked open, and a woman emerged slowly, as if gathering courage with each movement. She was thin, almost too thin, with dark circles under wary eyes that darted around the property before settling on Hank. Her brown hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and her denim jacket hung loose on her frame. "Mr. Davidson?" she called, her voice carrying a tremor she was clearly trying to control. Hank approached cautiously, his hand instinctively resting on the fence post. "That's me. Don't believe we've met." The woman took a deep breath. "My name is Ellen Reeves. I was a friend of your brother Robert's." The mention of his younger brother sent a jolt through Hank. He hadn't spoken to Robert in nearly 8 years, not since their last explosive argument had ended with words that couldn't be taken back. As far as Hank knew, Robert had been living somewhere in Colorado, working oil rigs and bouncing between jobs as he always had. "Robert?" Hank repeated, his voice rough with surprise. "What's this about?" Ellen's eyes dropped to the ground. "Robert passed away 3 weeks ago. Car accident, outside of Denver." The news hit Hank like a physical blow. Despite their estrangement, he'd always assumed there would be time to make things right. The knowledge that his brother was gone forever settled like a stone in his stomach. "I'm sorry to hear that," he managed, the words inadequate even to his own ears. "But I still don't understand why you're here." Ellen turned toward the passenger side of the truck. "There's someone you need to meet." She opened the door, and after a moment's hesitation, a small figure climbed out. A girl, no more than 10 years old, with a tangle of dark hair and eyes that were unmistakably Davidson eyes. The same deep blue that had belonged to Hank's father and grandfather, the same blue he saw in the mirror every morning. "This is Lily," Ellen said softly, Robert's daughter. The girl stood half hidden behind Ellen, clutching a worn backpack to her chest like a shield. She wore faded jeans with a patch on one knee and sneakers that had seen better days. Her gaze was both curious and guarded as she took in the ranch and the stranger who shared her eyes. "I didn't know Robert had a child," Hank said, his voice barely audible over the distant lowing of cattle. Ellen's mouth tightened. "There's a lot Robert didn't share with people." He wasn't. He struggled after he left Montana. Hank could read between the lines. His brother's demons, the drinking, the restlessness, the inability to stay in one place or with one person, had apparently followed him to Colorado. "Why are you here, Ms. Reeves?" Hank asked directly, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Ellen's shoulders straightened, gathering resolve. "Robert named you as Lily's guardian in his will. I've been taking care of her since since it happened, but I can't anymore. I lost my job last week and my landlord's selling the building. We're being evicted." Her voice cracked slightly. "I was Robert's neighbor, not family. I've done what I could, but she needs stability. She needs family." Hank felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. A guardian? Him? He lived alone, worked from dawn till dusk, and hadn't been around children since he was one himself. He knew horses, cattle, and the rhythm of seasons, not how to care for a young girl who just lost her father. "There must be someone else," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. "Her mother died when she was 3, Ellen interrupted. "There's no one else, Mr. Davidson. You're it." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lily shifted, drawing both adults' attention. She was studying the horses in the paddock, her expression softening as she watched them move gracefully across the enclosure. "I brought all the paperwork," Ellen continued, pulling a manila envelope from her bag. "Birth certificate, school records, the will. It's all legal. Robert was clear about wanting her to come to you if anything happened." Hank took the envelope mechanically, his mind racing. "I can't just—" "We've driven 2 days to get here," Ellen cut in, her voice low and urgent. "I've got $28 to my name and nowhere to go. I can't take care of her anymore, Mr. Davidson. I wish I could, but I can't." The finality in her tone struck him. Looking at her more closely, Hank could see the exhaustion etched in her face, the desperation in her eyes. This wasn't a woman looking to pass off a responsibility. This was someone at the end of her rope. "You could at least invite us in for a glass of water," Ellen added, a hint of defiance in her voice. "We've come a long way." Hank nodded stiffly, gesturing toward the house. "Come on then." The house was clean but sparse, a bachelor's home with little decorations save for a few faded photographs, and Margaret's quilt draped over the back of the sofa. Hank filled glasses with water from the tap while Ellen and Lily sat at the kitchen table, both perched on the edges of their chairs as if ready to flee at any moment. "Are those your horses?" Lily asked suddenly, her voice small but clear. Hank turned, surprised to hear her speak. "Yes, 3/4 horses and 1 old Mustang." "What are their names?" "Thunder, Reno, Star, and the old one is Dusty." Lily nodded solemnly, as if cataloging this information. "My dad told me stories about horses. He said he used to ride when he was little." "He did," Hank confirmed, a memory surfacing of Robert at 12, fearlessly galloping across open fields on their father's prized gelding. "He was a natural." A small smile flickered across Lily's face before disappearing. She took a sip of water, then asked, "Did you know my dad was dead?" The directness of the question caught Hank off guard. "No," he answered honestly. "I hadn't spoken to your father in a long time." "Why not?" Ellen intervened gently. "Lily, that's not polite to ask." But Hank shook his head. "It's a fair question." He met Lily's steady gaze. "Your dad and I had a disagreement a long time ago. We both said things we shouldn't have, and then we were both too stubborn to make it right." Lily considered this. "My dad was stubborn. He said it was a Davidson trait." Despite everything, Hank felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. He was right about that. Ellen cleared her throat. "Mr. Davidson, I know this is sudden, but we need to figure this out. I can stay the night, help get Lily settled, but I've got a job interview in Seattle in 3 days. It's my only shot right now." The reality of the situation crashed back over Hank. This child, this piece of his brother he'd never known existed, was about to become his responsibility. The thought terrified him more than facing down an angry bull or riding an unbroken horse. "I don't know anything about raising a child," he said bluntly. "Neither did Robert," Ellen replied. "But he tried, in his way. Lily's a good kid. She's smart, helps without being asked, and doesn't complain much." Lily sat silently, her eyes moving between the adults as they discussed her fate as if she weren't there. Her small fingers worried at a loose thread on her backpack. "I've got work from sunup to sundown," Hank continued. "The nearest school is 10 miles away. This isn't a place for a child." "It's a place with family," Ellen countered. "That's what she needs most right now." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. A wedding gift to Hank and Margaret nearly 20 years ago. Hank looked at Lily, really looked at her, and saw flashes of his brother in the set of her jaw, the shape of her nose. But there was something else there too, a quiet resilience that reminded him of his mother. "You hungry?" he asked abruptly. Lily nodded, some of the wariness leaving her expression. "I was about to fix some dinner anyway. Nothing fancy. Just stew and biscuits." "We don't want to impose," Ellen began. But Hank waved her off. "You've driven 2 days. Least I can do is feed you while we figure this out." As Hank moved around the kitchen, pulling ingredients from the fridge and pantry, he felt Lily's eyes following him. He wasn't much of a cook, had learned out of necessity after Margaret died. But the beef stew was one of the few dishes he could make well. "Can I help?" Lily asked after a few minutes. Hank hesitated, then nodded. "You can cut up these carrots if you know how to use a knife." "I do," she said, sliding off her chair. "I used to help my dad make dinner sometimes." Hank found a small paring knife and set her up at the table with a cutting board. Her small hands worked carefully, methodically cutting the carrots into neat pieces. There was something both heartbreaking and heartwarming about the practiced way she handled the task. A child who'd had to grow up too fast. Ellen excused herself to use the bathroom, leaving uncle and niece alone in the kitchen. The silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable but heavy with unspoken questions. "Did my dad talk about you?" Hank asked finally. Lily nodded, her eyes on the carrots. "Sometimes. When he wasn't." She trailed off, then continued cutting. "When he wasn't drinking," Hank supplied gently. She nodded again. "He said you were the best horseman in Montana. That you could calm any horse just by talking to it." Hank's throat tightened unexpectedly. "He said that?" "Uh-huh. He said you were brave and stubborn, and that you never broke a promise once you made it." The words hit Hank hard, that his brother, despite everything, had spoken of him with respect to his daughter, had preserved some part of their relationship, even if only in stories. "Your dad was brave too," Hank offered. "Fearless, sometimes too much for his own good." A small smile curved Lily's lips. "That's what Ellen says too." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the chopping of vegetables and the soft bubbling of the stew. "Mr. Davidson?" Lily said suddenly, setting down her knife. "I don't want to go to Seattle with Ellen." Hank looked up, surprised by the directness. "No?" Lily shook her head, her eyes serious beyond her years. "She's nice, but she's not. She's not family. Dad always said family was important, even though—" She swallowed hard. "Even though he didn't talk to his." The simple truth in her words struck Hank like a physical blow. Here was his brother's child, standing in his kitchen, offering a chance to make right what had gone wrong between the Davidson brothers. A chance he'd never have with Robert himself. Ellen returned, and they finished preparing the meal together. The stew was simple but hearty, filling the kitchen with the comforting aroma of home cooking. As they ate, Ellen shared more details about Robert's life in Colorado, how he'd worked on oil rigs, and as a mechanic, his struggles with alcohol, but also his deep love for his daughter, how he'd been sober for 8 months before the accident, trying to create a stable home for Lily. "He kept your picture," Ellen said, pulling a worn photograph from her purse and sliding it across the table to Hank. "This was in his wallet." Hank picked it up with slightly trembling fingers. It was an old photo of him and Robert at a rodeo competition nearly 20 years ago, both of them young and grinning, arms slung around each other's shoulders. Before the arguments, before life pulled them in different directions. "I didn't know he had this," Hank said quietly. "He never stopped thinking of Montana as home," Ellen told him. "He talked about bringing Lily here someday when he got himself together. Said the mountains would straighten him out if anything could." After dinner, Hank showed them to the spare bedroom, untouched since Margaret's parents had visited 6 years ago. The room was dusty but clean, with a double bed and a small dresser. "You two can take this room tonight," he said. "We'll figure things out in the morning." Ellen thanked him, the relief evident in her voice. As Hank turned to leave, Lily called after him. "Mr. Davidson, thank you for dinner." He nodded awkwardly. "Get some rest, Lily?" That night, Hank sat on his porch long after the lights in the spare bedroom had gone out, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. The photo of him and Robert lay on the small table beside him, a ghostly reminder of what was lost and what might yet be saved. Inside the house was his brother's child, a girl with Davidson eyes who cut carrots with careful precision and spoke with a directness that both unnerved and impressed him. A girl who needed a home, a family. "What am I supposed to do, Margaret?" he whispered to the night air, as he often did when facing a difficult decision. His wife had always been the one with clear sight, with the ability to cut through complications to the heart of a matter. The night offered no answer, but as Hank watched a shooting star trace across the sky, he felt something shift inside him, a door opening that had been closed for too long. Morning arrived with a soft golden light that made the Montana landscape glow like a painting. Hank, who typically rose before dawn, had barely slept, his mind cycling through possibilities and fears. By the time he heard movement in the spare bedroom, he had coffee brewing and was frying bacon in the cast-iron skillet that had been his grandmother's. Ellen appeared first, her hair damp from a shower, looking marginally less exhausted than the previous evening. "Morning," she said cautiously. "Hope it's okay I used your shower." Hank nodded. "Coffee's ready. Breakfast soon." "Thank you." She poured herself a cup, then leaned against the counter. "Mr. Davidson." "Hank," he interrupted. "Mr. Davidson was my father." A small smile touched her lips. "Hank, I want you to know that Robert really did try. These last few months especially. He wanted to be better for Lily." "I wish I'd known," Hank said quietly. "About both of them." Ellen sighed. "Pride's a powerful thing. Robert always said Davidson men could drown in their own stubbornness." Before Hank could respond, Lily appeared in the doorway, her hair brushed and wearing clean clothes, jeans and a faded green t-shirt with a horse silhouette. She looked smaller in the morning light, vulnerable in a way that tugged at something long dormant in Hank's chest. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," Hank replied. "Hungry?" She nodded, approaching the kitchen table with the same caution as the previous night. As they ate breakfast, bacon, eggs, and toast, Hank found himself studying her, noting the way she ate carefully, making sure not to spill, the way her eyes occasionally darted to the window where the horses could be seen in the morning sunlight. "I need to feed the horses after breakfast," Hank said. "You can come along if you want." Lily's face brightened momentarily. "Really?" "Sure. They ought to meet you." After breakfast, Ellen helped clean up, while Hank led Lily out to the barn. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the nearby mountains and the earthy aroma of horses and hay from the barn. "Have you been around horses before?" Hank asked as they walked. Lily shook her head. "Just pictures, and once at a fair, but they wouldn't let me pet them." "Well, these horses are used to people, Dusty especially. He's old and gentle. You can pet him if you'd like." The barn was cool and dim after the bright morning sunlight. Lily stayed close to Hank's side as he moved toward the stalls where 4 curious heads were already poking out, nickering softly in anticipation of breakfast. "This is Thunder," Hank said, stopping at the first stall where a muscular bay gelding stood. "He's the youngest, still has some fire in him," Thunder snorted, tossing his head as if to demonstrate the point. Lily giggled, the first genuine laugh Hank had heard from her. "And this is Reno," he continued, moving to the next stall where a dappled gray mare watched them with intelligent eyes. "She's the smartest of the bunch. Figures out gate latches if you're not careful." "She's beautiful," Lily breathed, reaching out hesitantly before pulling her hand back. "You can touch her," Hank encouraged. "Just let her smell your hand first, like this." He demonstrated, holding his palm flat under Reno's nose. The mare sniffed, then gently bumped his hand with her muzzle. Lily followed his example, her eyes widening with delight when Reno gave her the same gentle greeting. "Her nose is so soft," quote, she exclaimed. "Next to Star," Hank said, moving to a chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead. "She's steady and reliable. Best trail horse I've ever had." Star stretched her neck over the stall door, clearly hoping for treats. Lily was more confident now, reaching up to stroke Star's neck. "And this old fellow," Hank said, stopping at the last stall, "is Dusty." The aging Mustang regarded them with calm, knowing eyes. His once dark coat had faded to a dusty buckskin color, and white hairs peppered his face. "How old is he?" Lily asked. 27, Hank answered. "Had him since he was 5. We've seen a lot together, Dusty and me." Lily approached the Mustang cautiously. Dusty lowered his head, allowing her to stroke his forehead. "He's like a grandpa horse," she said seriously. Hank couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his mouth. "That's about right." They fed the horses together, Lily following Hank's instructions carefully as she measured out grain and filled water buckets. Her small face was serious with concentration, determined to get everything right. "You're good with them," Hank observed as they finished. "Natural, like your dad was." Lily beamed at the comparison. Could I learn to ride someday? The question hung in the air between them, innocent on the surface, but loaded with implications about the future, about whether there would be a someday for her here at Double Pine Ranch. "We'll see," Hank said finally, unable to commit either way. When they returned to the house, Ellen was sitting at the kitchen table with paperwork spread before her. She looked up as they entered, a mixture of hope and anxiety on her face. "I've laid everything out," she said. "Birth certificate, school records, Robert's will. The legal guardianship papers just need your signature." Hank felt a tightness in his chest. The moment of decision had arrived, sooner than he'd expected. "Can I have a word with you?" he asked Ellen, nodding toward the porch. To Lily, he added, "There's lemonade in the fridge if you're thirsty." Outside, the morning sun had risen higher, burning away the coolness of dawn. Hank leaned against the porch railing, struggling to find the right words. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted finally. "I've been alone for 5 years. Don't know the first thing about raising a child, especially one who's just lost her father." Ellen's expression softened with understanding. "Nobody's ever ready for parenthood, Hank, whether it comes naturally or lands on your doorstep like this. Robert wasn't ready either, but he did his best. What if my best isn't good enough? She deserves better than a grumpy old rancher who can barely take care of himself." "She deserves family," Ellen countered gently. "Someone who knew her father, who shares her blood. Someone who can tell her stories about where she comes from." She paused. "I care about Lily. If I thought for 1 second you were going to hurt her, I wouldn't have brought her here, legal guardian or not." Hank ran a hand through his hair, frustration and fear battling within him. "I've got a ranch to run. Animals that depend on me. I can't just drop everything to drive her to school and whatever else kids need." "Then you adjust," Ellen said simply. "People do it every day. Single parents, widows, widowers. They figure it out because they have to." Through the window, they could see Lily sitting at the kitchen table, carefully petting a farm cat that had appeared from nowhere, one of the many barn cats that Hank fed but rarely paid attention to. The small, ordinary scene squeezed something in Hank's chest. "I need time to think," he said finally. Ellen's face fell. "I don't have much time to give you, Hank. My bus to Seattle leaves tomorrow morning." The reality of the timetable struck Hank again. "What if you take her with you? Just until I can get things sorted here, make some arrangements?" "I'm staying in a shelter until I can find work," Ellen said bluntly. "It's no place for a child. And if I can't find work, I'll have to move on. Lily needs stability, not following me around while I try to get back on my feet." Hank fell silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a physical burden. "Just talk to her," Ellen suggested. "Really talk to her. She's lost everything, Hank. Her home, her father, her sense of security. But she's stronger than she looks." Inside, they found Lily still at the table, the cat now purring in her lap. She looked up as they entered, her expression carefully neutral, but Hank could see the anxiety in the set of her small shoulders. "Lily," Ellen said gently, "Hank and I need to discuss some things. Would you like to go back out to see the horses while we talk?" Lily stroked the cat once more before, carefully setting it down. "Are you going to send me away?" she asked directly, her blue eyes, so like Robert's, so like Hank's own, fixed on her uncle's face. The question, stark and unvarnished, caught Hank off guard. "I don't know yet," he answered honestly. "This is all very sudden." Lily nodded, accepting his answer with a maturity that seemed out of place in her young face. "I'll go see the horses," she said, slipping past them and out the door. Once she was gone, Ellen turned to Hank. "She's been through this before, the uncertainty, the discussions about where she'll go next. After Robert died, there were questions about foster care before I stepped in. She understands more than you might think." Hank sank into a chair at the table, suddenly exhausted despite the early hour. "Tell me about her. What she likes, what she needs." Ellen sat across from him, relief evident in her posture. "She's smart, reads above her grade level. Quiet, but observant. Loves animals, drawing, and stories about the West. Robert used to tell her tales about growing up here." She smiled faintly. "She's stubborn, like her father. Once she sets her mind to something, it's hard to change it." "Sounds like a Davidson," Hank murmured. "She's had it rough, but she's resilient. Doesn't complain much, even when things are hard." Ellen hesitated. "She has nightmares sometimes about the accident. She wasn't in the car, thank God. But she's scared of losing more people." Hank nodded, absorbing this information. "School?" "She's in 4th grade. Good student when she can attend regularly. They moved around a bit before settling in Denver last year." Ellen reached for the school records. "Everything's here. Her last report card, vaccination records, everything you'd need to enroll her." They spent the next hour going through the paperwork, Ellen explaining Lily's routines, her few belongings packed in the truck, her favorite foods, and the small rituals that made her feel secure. With each detail, the abstract concept of Robert's daughter became more concrete, more real. A child with preferences and fears, hopes and needs. "I should talk to her," Hank said finally, standing up from the table. "Alone." Ellen nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I'll be here." Hank found Lily in the corral, sitting on the bottom rail of the fence, watching the horses graze in the morning sunlight. She didn't turn as he approached, though he knew she heard his footsteps in the gravel. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She shrugged, a small movement of thin shoulders. Hank leaned against the fence beside her, following her gaze to where Dusty was dozing in a patch of sunlight, one hind hoof cocked in relaxation. "I used to sit just like this when I was your age," Hank said after a moment, watching the horses, thinking. Lily glanced at him briefly. "What did you think about?" "Oh, all sorts of things. Where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do when I grew up. Sometimes just making up stories about the horses, imagining they could talk to each other." A small smile flickered across her face. "I do that too. Make up stories, I mean." They fell silent again, the only sounds, the soft nickering of horses and the distant call of a meadowlark. "Lily," Hank began carefully, "I need to know what you want." She looked at him fully then, surprise evident in her face. "What I want?" "Yes, this is your life we're talking about. Seems only fair you have a say in it." Lily considered this, her small face serious. "Nobody's asked me that before," she said finally. "Well, I'm asking now." She looked back at the horses, gathering her thoughts. "I want—" she began, then stopped, started again. "I want somewhere that doesn't change all the time. Somewhere that feels like it could be home." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I want to stop being scared that everything's going to disappear again." The simple honesty of her words struck Hank to the core. Here was a child asking not for toys or privileges, but for the most basic sense of security. Something he had taken for granted until Margaret's death had shown him how quickly foundations could crumble. "And you think that could be here?" he asked. "With a stranger who doesn't know anything about raising kids." Lily turned to face him, her eyes, those Davidson eyes, steady and direct. "You're not a stranger. You are my dad's brother. You're family." "Family?" Hank repeated, the word sitting heavy in his mouth. "Your dad and I, we hadn't spoken in years." But you were still brothers, Lily said, with the simple logic of a child. Dad said blood is blood, even when you're mad at each other. Despite everything, Hank felt a smile tug at his mouth. He said that, did he? Lily nodded. He had your picture. He told me stories about when you were kids, about how you taught him to ride and fish and build a campfire. She paused. He said someday he'd bring me to Montana to meet you, when he got better. The words were like a physical blow, reminding Hank of all the time lost, all the chances missed. Robert had wanted to come home, to reconnect. Now he never would. But his daughter was here, carrying his memory, his blood, his Davidson eyes. I don't want a horse, Lily said suddenly, her voice small but clear. Everyone thinks because I like horses, that's what I want. But it's not. What do you want then? Hank asked. She met his gaze directly, vulnerability and determination warring in her young face. I want a dad. Or someone like a dad. Someone who stays. The simple statement, delivered with such raw honesty, pierced through all of Hank's defenses. This child wasn't asking for perfection or expertise, just presence, consistency, the basic security of knowing someone would be there tomorrow and the day after. I don't know if I can be what you need, Hank admitted, his voice rough with emotion. I'm set in my ways. I make mistakes. I might not be any good at this. My dad made mistakes too, Lily said simply, but he tried. He always came back, even when things were bad. Hank looked out over his land, the ranch he'd built, the mountains beyond, the life he'd carved out for himself. A solitary life, orderly and predictable, with no room for the chaos and uncertainty a child would bring. And yet, stay, he heard himself say, the word surprising him as much as it seemed to surprise Lily. If that's what I can give you, a place that doesn't change, someone who stays, then stay. Lily's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. Really? Really, Hank confirmed, the decision settling into his bones with unexpected rightness. I can't promise I'll be good at this. I'll probably make a mess of things sometimes, but I can promise I'll be here, that this place will be your home for as long as you want it. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. Promise? She whispered. Promise, Hank said firmly. Davidsons don't break promises, remember? A small, tremulous smile broke across her face like sunrise over the mountains. Without warning, she slid off the fence rail and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face against his worn flannel shirt. Hank froze for a moment, startled by the contact, then slowly, awkwardly, placed a hand on her back. Something shifted in his chest, a door opening wider, letting in light that had been absent for too long. Above them, the vast Montana sky stretched endlessly blue, witness to the unlikely beginning of a family pieced together from broken parts, finding in each other what they had each been missing: a home, a purpose, a second chance. Come on, he said gently, patting her shoulder. Let's go tell Ellen the news. As they walked back to the house, Lily's small hand found its way into his calloused one, a bridge between past and future, between what was lost and what might yet be found. On the horizon, the Bitterroot Mountains stood sentinel, unchanging and enduring, much like the promise newly made between a lonely rancher and his brother's child, to stay, to build something new from the ashes of what was gone, to become, against all odds, a family. The days that followed settled into a tentative rhythm, like dancers learning unfamiliar steps, sometimes graceful, sometimes stumbling, but gradually finding harmony. Hank rose before dawn as always, but now he sat two places at the breakfast table instead of one. The silence that had been his constant companion for 5 years was replaced by small sounds. A child's footsteps on the wooden floors, questions asked in a clear, curious voice, the occasional laugh that reminded him so much of his brother it made his chest ache. Ellen had departed for Seattle with tears and promises to write, leaving behind a 10-year-old girl with a backpack of meager possessions and eyes too old for her face. The first night alone, Hank had stood awkwardly in the doorway of the spare bedroom, Lily's bedroom now, watching as she carefully arranged her few treasures on the dresser. A small carved horse that had been her father's, a tattered paperback of Black Beauty, and a photograph of Robert holding a toddler Lily on his shoulders, both of them laughing at some forgotten joke. "All set?" he'd asked, unsure of the proper protocol for bedtime. Lily had nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed in pajamas that had seen better days. "I usually read before sleep if that's okay." "Course it is," Hank had replied, relieved at such a simple request. "Need anything else?" She'd hesitated, then shaken her head, but something in her posture had told Hank there was more she wasn't saying. He'd lingered, uncomfortable, but determined. "What is it, Lily? Best to speak your mind in this house." "It's just—" She'd looked down at her hands. Dad used to check under the bed. "For monsters. I know it's silly, I'm too old for that, but—" "Never too old to be cautious about monsters," Hank had interrupted, his voice gruff but kind. Without further comment, he'd crossed the room and made a show of checking under the bed, then in the closet for good measure. "All clear," he'd reported seriously. "But if any show up later, you just holler. I'm right down the hall." The relief in her eyes had been worth the momentary embarrassment he'd felt at playing along with a child's fears. As he'd turned to leave, her small voice had stopped him again. "Uncle Hank? Thank you for letting me stay." The simple gratitude had caught him off guard, leaving him fumbling for words. "This is your home now, Lily. No need to thank me for that." Now, 2 weeks later, they were gradually establishing routines, learning to navigate the unfamiliar territory of their shared life. Mornings began with breakfast. Hank discovering that scrambled eggs and bacon, his standard fare, could be varied with pancakes shaped like horses, attempted at Lily's request and executed with limited artistic success, or oatmeal with brown sugar and cinnamon, a recipe recalled from Margaret's repertoire. Then came chores. Simple tasks for Lily at first. Feeding the chickens Hank kept for eggs, helping collect vegetables from the small kitchen garden Margaret had started, and Hank had maintained in her memory. After chores, they faced the most significant adjustment to Hank's solitary existence: school. Clearwater Creek Elementary was indeed 10 miles away, requiring Hank to restructure his entire workday around the drive. He'd visit with Principal Matthews, a stern woman with kind eyes who had reviewed Lily's records with pursed lips, noting the frequent changes of schools with silent disapproval. "Stability is essential for children," she'd said pointedly, peering at Hank over reading glasses. "She has that now," Hank had replied, straightening his shoulders against the implied criticism. "She's with family. She's staying." The principal's expression had softened. "That's what she needs most, Mr. Davidson. The rest will follow." Enrolling Lily had required paperwork. Hank found more daunting than breaking a wild horse, but she had started the following Monday, wearing new clothes purchased during an awkward but necessary trip to the department store in the neighboring town of Riverton. They'd both been fish out of water, Hank baffled by the children's department, and Lily overwhelmed by the prospect of new things after years of hand-me-downs and thrift store finds. "You don't have to get all this," she'd protested, as Hank added jeans, shirts, and a warm jacket to their cart. "Montana winters are cold," he'd replied simply. "You need proper gear." The first week of school had brought its own challenges. Hank, accustomed to working from sunrise to sunset, now had to pause mid-morning to drive Lily to school, then arrange his afternoon to pick her up at 3 o'clock. It meant shifting feeding schedules, postponing fence repairs, and sometimes working by lamplight after Lily had gone to bed, but he adjusted without complaint. A promise was a promise, and Davidsons kept their word. Lily, for her part, approached school with the same quiet determination she brought to everything. She didn't speak much about her days when Hank picked her up, answering his awkward questions with brief reassurances that everything was fine. It wasn't until the end of the second week, when Mrs. Matthews called Hank at home, that he learned the full story. "Lily had an incident today," the principal explained over the crackling phone line. "A physical altercation with another student." Hank's grip tightened on the receiver. "Is she hurt?" "No, but the other child has a bloody nose. Lily refuses to explain what happened, so I need you to come in." He'd found Lily sitting outside the principal's office, her face set in the stubborn expression he was coming to recognize as her defense against the world. Her knuckles were scraped, her eyes defiant despite the tear tracks on her cheeks. "Want to tell me what happened?" he asked, Settling into the hard chair beside her, she stared straight ahead. "They said I had to tell the principal or you. I pick you." "All right then," she took a deep breath. "Billy Mercer said my dad was probably a drunk who drove into a tree on purpose." Her voice trembled slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "He said that's what his dad told him, that the new girl's father was a no-good drifter who killed himself drinking and driving." Cold anger settled in Hank's stomach. Small towns had long memories and loose tongues, and clearly someone had recognized the Davidson name, had connected Lily to Robert and his troubled history. "So you hit him," Hank stated, not a question. Lily nodded once, sharply. "He wouldn't take it back. I asked him 3 times to take it back." Hank was silent for a long moment, weighing his response carefully. Violence wasn't the answer, he knew he should say. Fighting doesn't solve problems. But looking at this small girl, who had defended her father's memory with her fists because words had failed her, he couldn't bring himself to deliver the expected lecture. "Your dad made mistakes," he said finally, his voice low. "He struggled with drinking, that's true, but the accident wasn't his fault. He was sober when it happened, had been for months, and he loved you more than anything in this world." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "You know that, right?" She nodded, a tear escaping despite her efforts to contain it. "People will talk. Small towns are like that, but you and me, we know the truth about your dad. That's what matters." He reached out awkwardly, patting her shoulder. "Next time, though, maybe try walking away first. Come find me or your teacher if words don't work. Save those fists for emergencies." The meeting with Principal Matthews had been brief and to the point. Yes, Lily was wrong to resort to violence. No, it wouldn't happen again. Yes, they would talk about appropriate responses to provocation, but Hank had also made it clear, in measured tones that belied the anger simmering beneath, that he expected the school to address the other child's behavior as well. "My niece has lost both her parents," he'd said quietly. "She's starting over in a new place. I won't have her tormented about her father's death, especially when the gossip being spread is wrong." On the drive home, they'd stopped at Martha's Diner for ice cream, chocolate for Lily, vanilla for Hank. A peace offering and celebration rolled into one. "Am I in trouble?" Lily had asked finally, studying her ice cream intently. Hank had considered his answer carefully. "Not with me," he'd said at last. "But there are better ways to handle folks like Billy Mercer. People who are hurting often try to hurt others. Doesn't make it right, but understanding that helps." "Were you ever in fights when you were my age?" she'd asked, glancing up at him with cautious curiosity. The question had surprised a short laugh from him. "More than a few. Your grandpa used to say I was born with my fists clenched." He'd sobered, memories washing over him. "But fighting didn't solve much in the end. Just gave me bruises and a reputation for being hot-headed." "Like my dad?" "Like your dad," Hank had confirmed. "Though Robert was smarter than me, he'd talk his way out of trouble while I was still swinging." That conversation had marked a turning point in their relationship. Lily began to ask more questions about her father, about the Davidson family history, about Hank's life before she arrived. Each answer he gave seemed to build a small bridge between them, connecting her to a past she'd never known and a future still taking shape. Now, on this crisp October morning, Hank watched from the corral fence as Lily tentatively offered an apple to Dusty, the old Mustang lowering his head gently to accept the treat from her small palm. It was Saturday, chores completed early, the day stretching before them with rare leisure. "He likes you," Hank observed, smiling slightly as Dusty lipped at Lily's pockets, searching for more treats. "I like him too," she replied, giggling as the horse's whiskers tickled her hand. She'd grown more comfortable with laughter in recent days, the sound no longer startling in its rarity. "Can I learn to ride him? Since he's the gentlest?" Hank had been expecting this question since her arrival. "Dusty's earned his retirement," he said. "But Star would be a good teacher for you if you're serious about learning." Lily's eyes widened with hope. "Really? You'd teach me to ride?" "Every Davidson should know how to sit a horse," Hank replied, the decision feeling right as the words left his mouth. We'll start tomorrow if the weather holds. Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transforming her solemn face into something luminous. These moments still caught Hank off guard. The simple joy she found in things he'd long taken for granted. The way her presence was gradually transforming his solitary existence into something richer, more textured. They spent the afternoon in the barn, Hank showing Lily how to groom Star, explaining each brush and its purpose, demonstrating how to pick out hooves and check for stones or injuries. Lily listened with intense concentration, her small hands eventually taking over the task, moving with growing confidence over the mare's glossy coat. "My dad said you won rodeo competitions," she said as they worked. "That you could ride horses nobody else could." Hank nodded, memories flooding back of dust and adrenaline, the roar of crowds and the heart-stopping moments suspended between earth and sky. "That was a long time ago, before I bought this place, before I met your Aunt Margaret. Do you have pictures? Trophies?" "Some," Hank admitted. "In the attic, I reckon. Haven't looked at them in years." Lily's hands stilled on the brush. "Could we look? Sometime?" The request was tentative, as her bigger asks always were. Careful, testing the boundaries of their still new relationship. Hank recognized the pattern now. The way she approached her desires sideways, never demanding, always prepared for disappointment. "We could look today if you want," he offered. After dinner. The attic was dusty and dim, illuminated only by the beam of Hank's flashlight as they navigated between boxes and trunks that hadn't been disturbed in years. Hank moved cautiously, mindful of the uneven floorboards and the cobwebs that draped like ghostly curtains from the rafters. "Here," he said finally, the light falling on a battered trunk tucked under the eaves. "This should be it." Together they dragged it to the center of the attic, where a bare bulb provided meager light. The trunk's hinges creaked in protest as Hank lifted the lid, releasing the musty scent of preserved paper and old leather. "Wow," Lily breathed, leaning forward eagerly as Hank began removing the contents. First came the trophies, modest by professional standards but hard-earned and once cherished. Belt buckles from various competitions, a few small cups, ribbons faded but still proudly proclaiming first place or champion. Lily handled each one reverently, reading the inscriptions aloud, asking questions about the events and horses mentioned. Beneath the trophies lay photographs. Hank in his 20s, leaner and less weathered, astride various horses in rodeo arenas across Montana and Wyoming. Robert appeared in many of them, first as a gangly teenager helping behind the scenes, later as a competitor himself in his late teens. "That's my dad!" Lily exclaimed, pointing to a photo of Robert at 17, grinning widely as he held the reins of a spirited-looking buckskin. He looked so young. He was, Hank confirmed, memory washing over him like a wave. Just starting to compete. Had a natural seat, your dad. Could feel what a horse was thinking almost before the horse knew itself. They worked their way through the photographs, Hank surprising himself with how many stories came flooding back. Tales of near misses and triumphant rides, of the brotherhood of the rodeo circuit and the long drives between competitions. Lily absorbed it all, occasionally asking questions but mostly just listening, building a picture of the father she'd lost and the family history she'd never known. At the bottom of the trunk, Hank's fingers brushed against soft leather. He paused, then carefully withdrew a small leather pouch. "Almost forgot about this," he murmured, untying the drawstring. "What is it?" Lily asked, leaning closer. Hank tipped the contents into his palm, a silver buckle smaller than the competition ones, the metal aged to a gentle patina, a galloping horse etched into its surface. "Your grandfather made this," Hank explained, his voice softening with memory. "Made one for me and one for your dad when we each rode our first horse alone. Mine's around here somewhere, probably in my dresser drawer. This was Robert's." Lily stared at the buckle, her eyes wide. "My grandpa made it?" Hank nodded. He was good with his hands. Couldn't read or write much, but he could work metal like nobody's business. He held out the buckle to Lily. "This belongs to you now." She took it with trembling fingers, running her thumb over the galloping horse. "But it was my dad's. It's special. That's why it should be yours," Hank said simply. "Your dad would want you to have it." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but they were different from the ones Hank had seen before. Not the tears of grief or frustration, but of connection, of finding a piece of herself in the story of those who came before her. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the buckle to her chest. They returned downstairs carrying a selection of photographs and smaller mementos, the silver buckle secure in Lily's pocket. As they settled in the living room, arranging their finds on the coffee table, Hank was struck by how different the house felt with these objects displayed. No longer a place preserved in the amber of grief, but a home where past and present conversed, where memories could be touched and shared. "I think we should put some of these up," he said, surprising himself with the suggestion. "On the walls. Been too barren here for too long." Lily looked up, hope brightening her face. "Really? Even the ones with my dad?" "Especially those," Hank confirmed, something easing in his chest as he made the decision. "This is your home now, Lily. It should have your family in it. Our family." The word hung between them, both fragile and sturdy, like a bridge being tested for the first time. Lily's smile was answer enough, a silent acceptance of this new definition they were creating together. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, the monster check, now a ritual that had evolved into a moment for quiet conversation about the day. Hank sat alone on the porch, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the stars emerge above the Bitterroot Mountains. The silver of a new moon hung in the sky, promising growth and change in the cycle to come. "You'd be proud of her, Robert," he said softly to the night air. "She's got your spirit, your eyes, and your stubborn Davidson chin." He chuckled softly, remembering his brother's determined expression, so mirrored in Lily's face when she set her mind to something. "I am doing my best here. Probably making all kinds of mistakes, but I'm trying." The night offered no answer beyond the gentle sigh of wind in the pines and the distant howl of a coyote. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty to Hank. Instead, it felt expectant, full of possibility, like a page waiting to be turned. Inside the house, a small lamp still burned in Lily's room, her reading light. In the barn, horses shifted in their stalls, and somewhere in the darkness, the ranch cats prowled for mice. Life continued its steady rhythm, but now with new notes added to the familiar melody. A child's laughter, questions that had no easy answers. Challenges that stretched Hank beyond the comfortable boundaries he'd established after Margaret's death. He'd told Lily that the ranch would be her home for as long as she wanted it, but in the quiet honesty of the Montana night, Hank acknowledged the truth. She had already changed what home meant. It was no longer simply a place of retreat, of solitary grief and routine, but a place of growth, of second chances, for both of them. Tomorrow they would begin riding lessons. Star was saddled and ready in the barn, and Hank had dug out an old helmet that would need adjusting for Lily's smaller head. There would be falls and frustrations, triumphs and small victories, much like the path they were navigating together as unexpected family. "One day at a time," Hank murmured, finishing his coffee as the first hints of sleepiness tugged at him. It was the approach that had carried him through the darkest days after Margaret's death, and it would serve now in this new chapter. Not rushing ahead to worry about all the challenges of raising a 10-year-old girl, but meeting each day as it came, with patience and presence. As he rose to go inside, Hank caught a glimpse of movement at Lily's window, a small figure looking out at the night sky, perhaps sharing in his moment of reflection. He raised a hand in silent greeting, and after a moment, she returned the gesture before disappearing back into her room. Two souls finding their way in the darkness, guided by the distant light of stars and the closer warmth of a home being remade through courage, compromise, and the quiet miracle of beginning again. November arrived with a blast of cold air sweeping down from Canada, bringing the first dusting of snow to the mountains surrounding Clearwater Creek. The Double Pine Ranch glowed in the early morning light, frost sparkling on fence posts and rooftops like scattered diamonds. Inside the ranch house, warmth radiated from the old wood stove as Hank stood at the kitchen counter, packing lunch for Lily's school day, a ritual that had become second nature over the past month. "Lily! Bus will be here in 15 minutes, he called up the stairs, adding an apple to the brown paper bag. The transportation arrangement had been a recent victory. Discovering the school bus route included a stop just half a mile from their driveway had freed Hank from the twice-daily drive, allowing him to restructure his work hours more efficiently. Footsteps thundered overhead, followed by the appearance of Lily at the top of the stairs. In the weeks since her arrival, subtle changes had transformed her. Her face had filled out with regular meals, and the wariness in her eyes had softened. Today she wore jeans, a flannel shirt that had once been Hank's, cut down and hemmed by Martha from the diner, who had taken to dropping by with casseroles and sewing projects. And the silver buckle that had been her father's, now attached to a belt that was still too long and wrapped twice around her waist. "I can't find my math homework," she announced, breathless from her search. "Did you check your backpack? Where you put it last night after I helped you with fractions?" Hank asked, raising an eyebrow. Lily's expression shifted from panic to sheepish realization. "Oh, right." She darted back to her room, returning moments later with her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Found it." "Breakfast," Hank reminded her, nodding to the bowl of oatmeal waiting on the table. "Can't learn on an empty stomach." As Lily slid into her chair and began eating, Hank found himself marveling yet again at how thoroughly his life had been rearranged. The kitchen that had once been a place of solitary, efficient meals was now adorned with crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator. The mudroom contained small boots alongside his worn work boots. Even his speech had changed. Shorter sentences punctuated by explanations, his usual taciturn manner giving way to the necessity of communication. "Writing after school?" Lily asked between bites, her eyes hopeful. "If the weather holds," Hank agreed. "Star needs the exercise." The riding lessons had progressed steadily over the past weeks. Lily approached horseback riding as she did everything, with determination and focus beyond her years. She'd taken her share of falls, but each time she dusted herself off and remounted without complaint. Now she could walk and trot confidently, even beginning to master the posting trot that would save her from a sore backside on longer rides. "I think I'm ready to try cantering," she ventured, watching Hank's reaction carefully. He considered this as he poured himself another cup of coffee. "We'll see. Ground's getting harder with the frost. Not the best time for trying new things that might end in a tumble." Though disappointment flickered across her face, Lily didn't argue. Instead, she finished her breakfast and carried the bowl to the sink. Another change in the household, this quiet sharing of tasks that had evolved naturally between them. "Better get your coat," Hank said, glancing at the clock. "Bus'll be at the corner soon." As Lily bundled up against the morning chill, Hank handed her the lunch bag. "Got your library book to return?" She nodded, patting her backpack. "And Mrs. Parker said I could check out 2 books this time since I finished the last one early." "Smart as a whip," Hank said with quiet pride. "Just like your grandmother. She was a great reader, too." These small connections to her family history had become precious to Lily. Hank had discovered that sharing memories of the Davidson family, not just Robert, but his parents, grandparents, the generations that had lived and worked in Montana since the 1880s, gave Lily a sense of belonging she desperately needed. "Will you tell me more about her tonight?" Lily asked, zipping up her coat. "Grandma Davidson?" "Sure thing," Hank promised. "Now, Scoot, or you'll miss that bus." He stood in the doorway, watching as she made her way down the long driveway, her breath forming small clouds in the frosty air. There was a newfound confidence in her stride that hadn't been there when she'd arrived, a girl who was beginning to feel secure in her place in the world. When she reached the end of the driveway, she turned and waved. Hank raised his hand in return, a lump forming unexpectedly in his throat. In just these few short weeks, this small ritual of goodbye and the anticipated hello of return had become the framework of his days. Moments he found himself looking forward to with surprising intensity. The sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of the school bus. Hank watched until Lily was safely aboard and the yellow vehicle disappeared around the bend before closing the door against the morning chill. The house felt momentarily empty without her presence, but there was work to be done. Fences to check before the heavy snows came, hay to be stacked in the barn, a leak in the stable roof to patch. As he pulled on his work coat and gloves, the telephone rang, its shrill sound unexpected in the morning quiet. Few people called the ranch, and never this early. "Davidson," he answered briskly. "Mr. Davidson, this is Principal Matthews." The woman's voice was formal, setting Hank immediately on edge. "Is Lily all right?" he asked, scenarios of bus accidents already flashing through his mind. "Lily is fine," Mrs. Matthews assured him, "but I need to speak with you regarding a matter of some importance. Would you be able to come to the school this afternoon? Say, 2 o'clock. What's this about?" Hank pressed, not liking the carefully neutral tone of her voice. There was a slight hesitation before she answered. I prefer not to discuss it over the telephone, Mr. Davidson. It concerns Lily's guardianship situation. A cold weight settled in Hank's stomach. I'll be there, he said shortly, hanging up before she could respond. The morning's work passed in a blur of mechanical motion, his mind circling endlessly around the principal's cryptic statement. Guardianship situation. The legal papers had seemed straightforward enough. Robert's will naming Hank as guardian, the forms Ellen had brought, everything signed and notarized. What could possibly be in question? By 1:30, Hank had cleaned up, changed into his least worn shirt, and was driving toward town, a knot of anxiety in his chest growing with each mile. He'd faced down charging bulls and bucking broncos with less trepidation than he felt walking into the school building, the smell of chalk and floor polish bringing back uncomfortable memories of his own brief educational career. Principal Matthews greeted him with a firm handshake, her expression giving nothing away as she led him to her office. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Davidson. Please, have a seat." Hank lowered himself into the chair opposite her desk, his hat in his hands. "What's this about, Mrs. Matthews? Your call mentioned Lily's guardianship." The principal folded her hands on the desk. "Yes, I received a call yesterday from a Mr. Lawrence Montgomery, an attorney from Denver. He claims to represent Lily's maternal grandparents, the Kendalls." "Maternal grandparents?" Hank repeated, confusion momentarily displacing his concern. "Ellen never mentioned them, said Lily's mother died when she was 3, that there was no family on that side. According to Mr. Montgomery, the Kendalls have been searching for their granddaughter since their daughter's death. They claim they were unaware of Robert Davidson's passing until recently, and they're now seeking custody of Lily." The words hit Hank like a physical blow. Custody. These strangers, people who had apparently made no effort to be part of Lily's life for 7 years, were trying to take her away. "That's ridiculous," he said flatly. "Robert named me as guardian. It's legal and binding." Principal Matthews' expression softened slightly. "I understand this is upsetting, Mr. Davidson. I'm simply passing along the information as it was conveyed to me. Mr. Montgomery asked for confirmation that Lily is enrolled here, which I was obligated to provide. He indicated that the Kendalls will be filing for custody in court. On what grounds?" Hank demanded, his voice rising despite his efforts to remain calm. "I'm not a lawyer, Mr. Davidson, but he mentioned something about blood relatives having precedence over more distant relations, particularly when the child in question has never met the current guardian before placement." She hesitated, then added, "He also made some implications about the suitability of a bachelor rancher raising a young girl alone." Anger flared hot in Hank's chest. "Suitability? I've given that child a home, stability, everything she needs. Where were these grandparents when Robert was struggling? When Lily was bouncing from school to school? Nowhere to be found, that's where." "I'm not taking sides," Principal Matthews said firmly. "My concern is for Lily's welfare. She's settled in well here. Her grades are excellent, and she seems happier than when she arrived. More secure." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a business card. "This is Mr. Montgomery's contact information. I suggest you consult a lawyer of your own, Mr. Davidson." Hank took the card mechanically, his mind racing. A lawyer would cost money. Money the ranch barely generated in the best of years. And how would he explain this to Lily? The promise of stability he'd made was being threatened, and he had no idea how to protect it. "Does Lily know about this?" he asked. Principal Matthews shook her head. "No. I felt it was your place to decide how and when to tell her." "Thank you for that at least," Hank said grimly, rising from his chair. "Is there anything else I should know?" "Just that Mr. Montgomery mentioned the Kendalls are planning to visit Clearwater Creek soon, to meet with you and Lily. They're apparently quite wealthy, Mr. Davidson, and determined." The implication was clear. This would not be an easy fight. Hank nodded once, settling his hat back on his head. "Appreciate the warning, Mrs. Matthews, but I made a promise to that girl. I intend to keep it." The drive home was torture, every mile bringing him closer to a conversation he dreaded. How could he tell Lily that once again, her life was in upheaval? That strangers were claiming the right to uproot her from the home she was just beginning to trust? When he pulled up to the bus stop at the appointed time, Lily was already waiting, her backpack clutched to her chest, her face lighting up at the sight of his truck. The simple joy of her recognition squeezed something in his chest, painfully tight. "You're early!" she exclaimed as she climbed into the passenger seat. "I thought you'd be fixing that roof all day." "Got done faster than expected," Hank lied, forcing a smile. "How was school?" As Lily chattered about her day, a good grade on her spelling test, a new book from the library, the continuing saga of her tentative friendship with Sarah Miller, who sat beside her at lunch, Hank tried to focus, to respond appropriately, all while the weight of what was coming pressed against his ribs like a physical burden. At the ranch, he delayed the inevitable, suggesting they check on Star before going inside. In the barn's familiar warmth, Lily moved confidently among the horses, her initial fear replaced by genuine affection. She spoke softly to each animal, offering treats from her pocket with a flat palm, checking water buckets automatically, tasks that had become second nature in the routine they'd established. "Can we still ride?" she asked, stroking Star's velvet nose. Hank hesitated. "Not today, I think. Weather's turning." As if to confirm his words, the first snowflakes began to fall outside the barn door. Not the light dusting of previous days, but the heavy, purposeful flakes that signaled a real storm approaching. "Let's get inside," he said. "Hot chocolate might be in order." In the kitchen, as Lily sat at the table watching him heat milk on the stove, Hank struggled to find the right words. There was no gentle way to deliver this news. No path that wouldn't lead to fear and uncertainty for a child who'd already endured too much of both. "Lily," he began, setting a steaming mug before her. "Something's come up that we need to talk about." She must have heard the strain in his voice, for her hands stilled around the mug, her eyes lifting to his face with sudden wariness. "What's wrong? Are you sending me away?" The question, the same one she'd asked that first day, pierced Hank to the core. "No," he said firmly. "Never that. I made you a promise, remember? This is your home for as long as you want it." Some of the tension eased from her small shoulders. "Then what is it?" Hank took a deep breath. "Principal Matthews called me in today. There's a lawyer from Denver who contacted the school. He says your mother's parents, your grandparents on her side, are looking for you. They want to meet you." Lily's brow furrowed. "My other grandparents? But Dad said Mom's family didn't want anything to do with us." "That's what I understood too," Hank said carefully. "But according to this lawyer, they've been looking for you since your mother died. They only just found out about your dad's accident." "Why do they want to see me now?" Lily asked, suspicion evident in her tone. "Where were they before?" "I don't know, sweetheart. But there's something else." Hank met her eyes directly, believing she deserved honesty. "They're talking about trying to get custody of you. That means—" "I know what custody means," Lily interrupted, her voice tight. "It means they want to take me away from here, make me live with them." Hank nodded gravely. "That's what they're saying. But I want you to know something. I'm not going to let that happen without a fight. If you want to stay here, then I will do everything in my power to make sure you can." Tears welled in Lily's eyes. "I don't want to go with them. I don't even know them. This is my home now. And it stays that way," Hank promised, reaching across the table to cover her small hand with his calloused one. "But they are your blood family, Lily. They have a right to meet you, at least. To know you're safe and well." "Do I have to meet them?" she asked, fear evident in her voice. Hank wished he could shield her from this entirely, but he knew the world didn't work that way. "I think we probably do need to meet with them, yes, but I'll be right there with you, every step of the way." Lily was quiet for a long moment, staring into her hot chocolate as if it might contain answers. Finally she looked up, her jaw set in the stubborn expression that reminded Hank so much of Robert. "What do we do now?" The simplicity of the question, the implicit trust that he would know how to navigate this challenge, humbled Hank. Truth was, he was as lost as she was, facing a battle he had no experience, fighting against opponents with resources he couldn't match. "First thing tomorrow, I'm going to talk to a lawyer in town," he said, projecting a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Jim Spencer handles legal matters for most folks around here. He'll know what our options are." "And tonight?" Lily asked in a small voice. Hank considered this. "Tonight, we do what we planned. You've got homework, I've got some bills to sort through, and then I promised you stories about your grandmother." "Nothing changes tonight, Lily. Nothing changes in this house at all, if I have anything to say about it. The routine of the evening, homework at the kitchen table, dinner preparation, the quiet companionship they'd established, felt both precious and precarious in light of the threat looming over them. Hank watched Lily move through these familiar patterns, her initial fear gradually giving way to a determined focus on immediate tasks, and found himself admiring her resilience yet again. After dinner, as promised, they settled in the living room where Hank shared stories of his mother, Hank Davidson, a schoolteacher who had fallen in love with a rough-edged rancher and created a home filled with books and music alongside the practical skills of rural life. He described how she'd taught both her sons to read before they started school, how she'd played the piano that still stood silent in the corner of the room, how she'd insisted on Sunday dinners as a family no matter what ranch work pressed. "She would have loved you," Hank told Lily, the truth of it settling in his chest with certainty. "Would have been proud to see another generation of Davidsons loving books the way she did." As the evening wound down and Lily prepared for bed, the nightly routine of teeth brushing, the monster check that had evolved into a simple goodnight chat, Hank found himself lingering in her doorway, reluctant to end this day that suddenly felt so tenuous. "Uncle Hank?" Lily asked as she climbed into bed. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," he replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Why do you want me to stay? I mean, your life was probably easier before I came. No driving to school or making lunches or helping with homework." The question caught him off guard with its directness. Hank considered his answer carefully, knowing that honesty was required. "My life was quieter before you came," he acknowledged. "More predictable, but it wasn't better." He looked around the room, at the books stacked on the nightstand, the drawings taped to the wall, the small carved horse that had been Robert's now given pride of place on the dresser, and felt the truth of what he was about to say with bone-deep certainty. "After your Aunt Margaret died, this place stopped being a home. It was just somewhere I slept between work days. I was existing, not living." He met Lily's eyes directly. "You changed that. You brought life back to this old house, made me remember there's more to living than just getting through each day." "So you're not sorry I came?" she asked, vulnerability naked in her voice. "Not for a single minute," Hank said firmly. "Whatever happens with these grandparents of yours, I want you to remember that. Having you here has been the best thing to happen to me in a very long time." Lily launched herself forward suddenly, thin arms wrapping around his neck in a fierce hug. "I don't want to leave," she whispered against his shoulder. "Please don't let them take me." Hank held her gently, this child who had carved out a place in his heart with quiet determination. "I'm going to do everything I can," he promised. "Everything." After Lily had fallen asleep, Hank sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, making notes for his meeting with Jim Spencer in the morning. His resources were limited. The ranch operated on thin margins in the best years. But he had some savings. And if necessary, there was the south pasture that could be sold. The thought of parting with any piece of the ranch his father and grandfather had built hurt, but not as much as the thought of losing Lily. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in quiet white. Winter in Montana was settling in, bringing with it long nights and the necessity of preparation, of battening down against the coming storms. Hank had always approached the season with practical readiness, ensuring sufficient hay was stored, pipes were insulated, equipment winterized. Now he faced a different kind of preparation, gathering his resources not against the physical challenges of winter, but against the emotional and legal battle ahead. The Kendalls, whoever they were, might have money and legal advantages on their side, but Hank had something he suspected they didn't: genuine love for Lily, not as an idea or an obligation, but as the unique, resilient person she was becoming. That, he decided as he finally headed to bed, would have to be enough, because the alternative, Losing her, after opening his heart to the possibility of family again, was simply unthinkable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.